It's only 15 people, Brielle said, slowly swirling the wine in her glass as if the entire conversation bored her. She didn't even look at me. Instead, she flipped through the catering brochure spread across my kitchen island. Every few seconds, she stopped to circle something, cross something out, or make another note in red ink. And, of course, you'll host. The words landed casually, almost carelessly. I stared at her for a moment, waiting for the familiar feeling to rise inside me, the guilt, the obligation, the automatic urge to say yes. It didn't come. Brielle pushed the menu toward me. "These prices are ridiculous," she said. "We should simplify the food. My mother's allergy is another issue, though. We'll need to make sure there are no nuts anywhere." I nodded silently, then she leaned back. "Oh, and Marcus's brother is bringing his kids. They hate hotels, so obviously they'll need the guest rooms." I took a slow sip of water. I placed the glass carefully on its coaster, then I smiled. "Perfect." Brielle finally looked up. "I'm going on a trip," I said. Her expression froze. "What?" "I'll be gone from December 22nd through New Year's Day." For several seconds, she simply stared at me. "You're going somewhere?" "Yes, but Christmas is. I know." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "So you and your 15 guests can do whatever you like," I continued calmly. "Just not here." The silence was almost beautiful. I stood, pushed my chair underneath the table, and began collecting the empty plates. Brielle didn't move. She was waiting for me to laugh, waiting for me to say I was joking, waiting for the apology she had come to expect whenever I interrupted one of their plans. But this time, there would be no apology. I carried the dishes to the sink. For years, I had loved Christmas. I remembered when Marcus used to call weeks in advance. "Mom, would it be okay if we came for Christmas?" Back then, there was always hesitation in his voice. He would offer to bring dessert. He would help unload the car. Sometimes he even arrived early to help me prepare. He used to kiss my cheek and say, "It smells like Christmas in here, Mom." Those holidays weren't perfect, but they were shared. Somewhere along the way, however, something changed. "Would it be okay?" became "We're coming. Can you help?" became "You'll handle it." And eventually, the invitations disappeared altogether. They simply assumed I would host. Last Christmas, I had cooked 2 main dishes, 6 sides, and 3 desserts. I babysat the children while Marcus and Brielle went shopping. I washed dishes while everyone else drank cider and laughed. Later, they posted a beautiful family photograph online. Everyone was smiling. The caption said, "Family Christmas at Mom's." There was no mention of the woman who had cooked everything, no mention of the hours spent cleaning, no mention of the groceries. I said nothing. I smiled. I hugged them goodbye, and I convinced myself that this was what mothers did. Then, in mid-November, the family group chat appeared, 15 people for Christmas. "Thanks in advance. Claire, you're the best. No question mark. No, are you available? No, would you like to host? Just an assumption." I stared at the message for several minutes, then I closed the chat. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my laptop. I searched for cabins, K8 places, winter retreats, anywhere far enough away that nobody could casually drop by. I eventually found one in Arizona, December 22nd through January 1st. 10 days, no guests. No cooking for 15, no rushing around, no expectations. Just me. I booked it. Then I sat back and looked at the confirmation email. For the first time in years, I had bought something entirely for myself. And strangely, I didn't feel guilty. I began remembering everything else I had quietly given them, the $4,800 I had loaned Marcus and Brielle when their HVAC system failed, the cash I had slipped into Marcus's coat when Brielle opened her bakery, the countless hours I had spent babysitting their children, the meals, the errands, the holidays, the favors. I had never kept score. That had been my mistake. Because when you give endlessly without boundaries, people eventually stop seeing generosity. They start seeing it as their entitlement. The final thing that changed my mind happened during another conversation about Christmas. Brielle looked at her phone and casually said, "Don't go overboard on food this year. Our budget is tight. Our budget." I almost laughed. I was the one buying the food. I was the one cooking it. I was the one opening my home. And somehow, my budget had become their concern. That night, I made my decision. I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was simply finished. The next morning, I printed their group message. I folded the paper neatly and placed it inside a plain white card. On the back, I wrote, "This home will be unoccupied from the 22nd of December through the 1st of January. Wishing you warmth, good food, and happy memories wherever you choose to gather. No insults, no accusations, just facts." I taped the card to the mailbox, then I locked the doors. The house looked strangely peaceful. No Christmas decorations, no folding chairs. No extra linens, no grocery lists, no mountains of food waiting to be prepared. I carried my suitcase outside. The porch light remained off. I placed my luggage in the trunk and looked back at the house. For years, it had been full of people, yet somehow I had often felt invisible inside it. This time, I was choosing to leave before anyone could make me feel that way again. I started the car. The radio filled the silence with old soul music. As I pulled away, I glanced once more at the mailbox. The card was still there. They had no excuse. They had been told. They simply weren't used to believing that I could actually say no. And soon, they were going to find out that I meant it. I was already halfway to Arizona when my phone began vibrating across the passenger seat. The first call came from Marcus. I watched his name appear on the screen. I didn't answer. A second call followed almost immediately, then a third. Finally, a message appeared. "Mom, where are you?" I smiled faintly, not because it was funny, because the question itself explained everything. They had never wondered where I was before. They had only wondered what I was doing for them. Another message arrived. "We're here. The gate is locked." Then another. "Mom, this isn't funny. I imagine them standing in the driveway." Marcus probably looked confused, one hand holding his phone while the other tried to keep the children from climbing out of the SUV. Brielle was probably staring at the dark windows. Maybe she was already angry. The next message confirmed it. "We have food and the kids are tired." What is going on? I didn't answer. There was nothing left to explain. I had left a note. I had told them the dates. I had made my plans clear. They simply hadn't believed me. Then the tone changed. "You're making a scene," a few seconds later. "This is incredibly selfish." I stared at that word, selfish. After years of cooking for them, babysitting their children, lending them money, opening my home, cleaning after their parties, and rearranging my life around their schedules, I was selfish because I had gone away for 10 days. I turned my phone face down. The road stretched ahead of me. For the first time, I felt no need to defend myself. By late afternoon, I reached the cabin. The air was dry and cool, pine trees surrounded the property, and the mountains glowed orange beneath the setting sun. The cabin was small. 2 bedrooms, a little kitchen, a wooden porch, an old heater that clicked whenever it turned on. But when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. There were no voices calling from another room, no oven timer. No child asking for juice, no adult asking where something was, no one waiting for me to solve a problem. I made a cup of coffee and sat beside the window. My phone remained silent for almost an hour. Then it buzzed. It was my neighbor, Lillian. She lived across the street from me and noticed everything. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. Then she laughed softly. "You should have seen them arrive." I raised an eyebrow. "They did?" "Oh, yes. The whole caravan." I could picture it. 3 cars, children. Overnight bags, boxes of food, and absolutely no plan. Lillian told me they had eventually gone to Marcus's brother's house. Apparently, there wasn't enough room, but they had made it work. Brielle attempted to cook the Christmas meal herself. The turkey looked beautiful from the outside. Inside, it was practically raw. Someone forgot the serving spoons. Someone else forgot ice. 3 adults slept on an air mattress that slowly deflated during the night. The children complained because they weren't in my house, and everyone seemed exhausted. I listened quietly. Years ago, I might have felt guilty. I might have driven home immediately. I might have rescued them, but this time, I didn't. "Did they say anything about me?" I asked. Lillian hesitated. "They told people you needed rest." I almost laughed. Rest. That was a convenient version of the truth. They couldn't tell everyone that I had planned the trip. They couldn't say I had warned them. They couldn't admit that I had simply refused, so they created a softer story. I was overwhelmed. I needed space. I wasn't feeling well, anything except the truth. I had chosen myself. That evening, I sat on the porch, beneath a sky crowded with stars. I wrapped myself in a cheap blanket I had bought at a gas station. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't sentimental, but it was mine. I realized something then. I hadn't left to punish anyone. I hadn't wanted them to suffer. I simply wanted to discover what my life felt like when I wasn't constantly serving everyone else's needs. And I liked what I found. Christmas morning was quiet. I woke without an alarm. No footsteps rushed through the hallway. No one shouted from the kitchen. No one needed breakfast. I dressed slowly and drove to a small diner nearby. The waitress brought me a cinnamon roll and coffee. I sat by the window and watched a hawk glide above the distant cliffs. There was something almost strange about having nowhere to be. For decades, every holiday morning had been a race. This morning, I had nowhere to go, and nobody was waiting for me. I realized how much I had missed that feeling. My phone buzzed. Marcus, you really left us hanging. That's not like you. I read the message twice. He was right. It wasn't like me. But maybe that was exactly the point. The woman who had always said yes was disappearing, and in her place was someone who had finally learned that saying no didn't make her cruel. It made her honest. I put the phone away. Outside, the sunlight spread across the desert. I finished my coffee. For the first time in years, Christmas belonged entirely to me, and I wasn't giving it back. 2 weeks after Christmas, Marcus called again. I saw his name on my screen while I was sitting beside the cabin window, reading a book I had found in the small local library. I let the phone ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded warm, almost careful. "Hi, Marcus. How are you?" "I'm good." There was a pause. "The kids miss you." I closed my book. For one brief moment, I felt something soften inside me, then Marcus continued, "You know, Mom, you really left us in a difficult position." There it was, the guilt hidden beneath the sweetness. "I told you I was leaving," I said. "Yeah, but—" He laughed nervously. "You could have reminded us. I looked through the window at the mountains." "I did. You left a note." "Yes." That was a little dramatic. I almost smiled. A note taped to a mailbox was dramatic. But arriving with 15 people at someone's home without asking wasn't. "I didn't say that," Marcus sighed. "I just think you could have handled things differently." I remained silent. He filled the silence. "You know how stressful the holidays are." "Yes," I said quietly. "I do." He didn't respond because he knew. I had spent years absorbing that stress for everyone else. Finally, he said, "Next time, just tell us if you need space." I looked down at my hands. I did need space. "No, I mean actually tell us." I understood then. He didn't want information. He wanted the old version of me to return. The version who explained herself, the version who apologized, the version who felt guilty for having needs. "I'm glad the children had Christmas," I said. "They did. I hope they enjoyed themselves. They asked about you." That sentence was carefully chosen. I knew what he wanted it to do, make me feel guilty, make me imagine disappointed faces, make me believe I had hurt them. But I wasn't going to use the children as an excuse to abandon myself again. "I miss them too," I said. Marcus became quiet, then he asked, "Are you coming home soon?" "I already came home." Another pause. "You did?" "Yesterday." I had returned quietly. I had spent the first night walking through my house. It looked exactly as I had left it. Except now, it felt different. The dining table was empty. The kitchen was spotless. The guest rooms were untouched. And somehow the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. Marcus finally said, "We should get together." "Maybe. When?" "I'll let you know." He sounded surprised. "You don't want to set a date?" "Not yet." For years, my calendar had been filled by other people. Birthdays, dinners, school events, babysitting, holidays, emergencies. Everything had a place, except me. Now I was learning how to leave blank spaces. Marcus sighed. "Mom, I don't know what happened to you." I looked around my quiet living room. "I do." He waited. I got tired. He didn't know how to answer that. Neither did I. Once, I used to think being tired was something mothers simply accepted. You cooked while tired. You cleaned while tired. You smiled while tired. You said yes while tired. Eventually, I realized exhaustion wasn't proof of love. It was often proof that something needed to change. After the call ended, I placed the phone on the table. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry, I simply felt clear. The next morning, I started cleaning out the garage, not because I was furious, because I wanted space. There were boxes everywhere. Old decorations, broken lights, folding tables, extra chairs, things I had kept because someone might need them someday. I opened the first box. Inside were Christmas decorations from years ago. A wooden angel caught my attention. Marcus had made it in second grade. The paint was faded. One wing was slightly crooked. I smiled and placed it on the keep pile. Everything else went into boxes. The folding tables were donated. The extra linens went to a shelter. The holiday decorations went to a church rummage sale. One box after another disappeared. The garage slowly became empty, and with every box I carried away, I felt lighter. I wasn't erasing my family. I was removing the evidence of a role I no longer wanted to play. That afternoon, I repainted the guest room. For years, it had been decorated around the possibility that someone visited. Now, I wanted it to feel like my room. I chose a soft cream color. I moved a small desk near the window. I placed a chair beside it. Then I added a bookshelf. It became a reading room, mine. A few days later, Lillian stopped by. She stood in the doorway and smiled. "This looks different. It feels different." She nodded. "I think you look different too." I laughed. "Better or worse?" "Free." That word stayed with me, free. I had spent years believing freedom meant having no responsibilities. Now I understood something else. Freedom could mean having responsibilities, but choosing which ones belonged to you. That evening, I made dinner for one, a simple bowl of soup. I set one plate on the table, one glass, one spoon. No extra chairs, no waiting. I ate slowly, and I wasn't lonely. That surprised me most of all. For so long, I had confused noise with connection. But silence could be peaceful. A full house could still feel empty. And an empty table could finally feel like home. A week later, I joined a local hiking group. I almost didn't go. The old me would have found an excuse. There was laundry. There were errands. Someone might need me. But nobody needed me that Saturday morning. So I went. There were 12 people waiting at the trailhead, strangers. They introduced themselves. Nobody asked what I could do for them. Nobody handed me a list. Nobody assumed I would organize anything. We simply walked. And for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's host, or someone's emergency plan. I was just myself. And that was enough. By early spring, my life had settled into a rhythm I barely recognized. I woke when I wanted. I made coffee slowly. I went hiking on Saturdays. I read in the afternoons and cooked only when I felt like cooking. There was no schedule built around everyone else anymore. Then one afternoon, while scrolling through my phone, I saw a photograph posted by Brielle. She was standing in her newly painted kitchen with her arms crossed. There was no smile. The caption said, "This year taught me not to rely on anyone." I stared at those words for several seconds. Then I smiled, not because I wanted her to suffer, not because I enjoyed seeing her frustrated, but because I finally understood that she was telling her version of the story. And I didn't need to correct it. She didn't need to know that I had never promised to host. She didn't need to know that I had planned my trip carefully. She didn't need to know that the woman she considered unreliable had spent decades being the most reliable person in her life. Let her believe whatever made the story easier. I had stopped needing their approval. Easter came quietly. I didn't send invitations. I didn't remind Marcus about plans. I didn't ask what the children wanted. Instead, I bought myself a small pie. I set the table with one plate, one fork, one glass. I ate near the window while sunlight moved across the floor. There was no loneliness in it. Only peace. That realization was enormous. I had spent years fearing empty chairs. Now I understood that an empty chair wasn't a punishment. Sometimes it was freedom. Mother's Day arrived a few weeks later. I waited for the phone to ring. It didn't. There was no card, no flowers, no message from Marcus. Instead, I saw another photograph online. Marcus and Brielle were standing near a rocky coastline in Maine. They looked happy. The caption read, "Much needed family reset." I looked at the photograph, then I closed the app. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt strangely relieved. Because I no longer needed a holiday to prove whether I mattered. My worth wasn't determined by who remembered to call. That summer, I became more involved with the hiking group. Every Saturday morning, we met at the same trailhead. There was laughter, there were complaints about sore legs, arguments about which trail was harder. Someone always brought too much water. Someone always forgot sunscreen. It was ordinary, and I loved it. Nobody expected me to host. Nobody assumed I would solve their problems. Nobody treated my generosity like an obligation. We were simply people enjoying each other's company. One Saturday, Lillian asked me why I had changed so much. I thought about it. I didn't really change, I said. I just stopped pretending, she smiled. That sounds like change to me. Maybe she was right. By September, I was planning another trip. This time, I found a cabin farther north near a lake. There was a wood-burning stove, a small porch, no Wi-Fi, very little cell service. Perfect. I marked the dates on my calendar. For the first time, I was planning Christmas before anyone else could plan it for me. I wanted another quiet holiday, not because I hated my family, because I had discovered how much I enjoyed my own company. November arrived. The weather became colder, stores filled with decorations. People began discussing Thanksgiving and Christmas. Then, one morning, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus. I opened the message. "You're still coming for Christmas, right?" I read it twice. No greeting, no question about how I was doing. Just another assumption. I sat at my kitchen table. A year earlier, that message would have triggered an immediate response. I would have started planning. I would have asked how many people were coming. I would have checked the guest rooms. I would have made lists. Instead, I placed my phone beside my coffee. I thought about the cabin, the lake, the wood stove, the quiet mornings, the book I wanted to finish. Then I typed 3 words. "No, but I hope it goes well." I stared at the message before sending it. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I pressed send, delivered ride. No immediate response. I smiled. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't revenge. It was simply a boundary. A few minutes later, Marcus replied, "Okay, just 1 word." I expected another argument, another guilt-filled message. Nothing came. Maybe he was beginning to understand. Or maybe he was simply accepting that the old version of me wasn't coming back. Either way, I was okay. That evening, I walked through my house. The guest room was still my reading room. The garage was nearly empty. The dining table no longer had enough chairs for 15 people. And for once, I didn't feel the need to change any of it. I thought about the woman I had been the previous Christmas. She had stood in this same kitchen while Brielle told her that 15 people were coming. She had listened. She had swallowed her frustration. She had probably spent the next several weeks preparing to make everyone else comfortable. That woman wasn't weak. She had simply been taught that love meant constant sacrifice. Now I knew better. Love could include boundaries. Love could include distance. Love could include saying no. And sometimes, loving yourself meant refusing to keep performing a role that everyone else had become comfortable exploiting. I looked around my quiet home. For years, I had believed the house needed to be full to feel alive. Now I knew the truth. It only needed to feel like mine, and finally, it did. The week after I turned down Christmas, I expected another call from Marcus. It never came. Instead, the silence stretched for days. At first, I wondered whether I had finally gone too far. Then I realized something important. Silence wasn't punishment. It was information. For years, I had been the one keeping the relationship alive. I called first. I invited them over. I remembered birthdays. I asked about the children. I sent messages before every holiday. I filled every uncomfortable silence. When I stopped doing that, I discovered how much of our connection had depended on my effort. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. One Saturday morning, I met the hiking group at the trailhead. The weather was cool, and the trees had begun changing color. Lillian handed me a thermos. "You look happy," she said. "I am." She studied me for a moment. "Really happy?" I nodded. "Really." We started walking. The trail climbed gradually through the trees. Nobody talked about family drama. Nobody asked me to solve anything. We discussed books, movies, travel, bad knees, and good coffee. Halfway through the hike, I stopped beside a small overlook. The valley stretched beneath us. For years, I had been so busy taking care of everyone that I had forgotten how beautiful ordinary life could be. I took a deep breath, then another, and I felt grateful, not for losing my old life, for finally discovering the life underneath it. That evening, I returned home and noticed something on my front porch, a package. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph of Marcus and the children. They were smiling. On the back, someone had written, "We miss you." I sat at the kitchen table with the photograph in my hands. For the first time, I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. I missed the children. That part was true. I missed their laughter. I missed reading bedtime stories. I missed the way they used to run toward me when I opened the door. But missing someone didn't mean I had to return to the same arrangement. That distinction took me years to learn. I placed the photograph in a frame, not as an invitation, not as a promise, simply because those children were part of my heart. A few days later, Marcus called. This time, his voice sounded different, less defensive, more tired. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course." "I've been thinking about Christmas." I waited. "I think we handled it badly." I said nothing, he continued. "We assumed you would do everything because you always had." The words surprised me, not because they were profound, because they were honest. "I know," I said. He sighed. "Brielle thinks you were angry with us." I was disappointed. "That's fair." Another pause, then he asked, "Are you coming for Christmas?" No. He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "Okay." I leaned back in my chair. "I've already booked another cabin." "For Christmas?" "Yes." He laughed softly. "That sounds like you now." I smiled. "It is." Then he asked something I hadn't expected. "Can we visit you sometime?" "Just us. No party. No expectations." I considered it. That was different. Not because he was asking permission to enter my house, because he was finally asking instead of assuming. "Maybe," I said. "I'll let you know." He laughed. "You really like saying that now." "I do." We talked for another few minutes. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no tears, no grand apology, no promise that everything would magically become perfect. But something had shifted. Marcus had finally understood that access to my time wasn't automatic. And I had finally understood that setting boundaries didn't mean closing the door forever. It meant deciding who could walk through it. After the call, I made tea. I opened my calendar. Christmas was circled in red. The cabin reservation was confirmed. I had already bought a warm sweater. I had a list of books to bring, and for the first time, I was excited about the holiday without feeling responsible for anyone else's happiness. That night, I wrote a sentence in my journal. "I am not abandoning my family. I am abandoning the version of myself that disappeared inside them." I read it twice, then I closed the journal. Outside, the first cold wind of winter moved through the trees. Inside, the house was quiet. But this time, quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like freedom. And I knew that whatever happened next, I would never again confuse being needed with being loved. Christmas morning arrived quietly. There was no crowded kitchen, no grocery list taped to the refrigerator, no turkey waiting to be prepared, no children running through the hallway, no one asking me where the serving dishes were. I was at the cabin beside a frozen lake, watching the early sunlight move across the water. The wood stove crackled behind me. A mug of coffee warmed my hands. On the table sat a book I had been saving for the trip. I opened it and began reading. For years, Christmas had meant work. This year, it meant peace. My phone remained on the table. I didn't turn it off. I simply refused to let it control the day. Around noon, a message arrived from Marcus. "Merry Christmas, Mom. We love you." I stared at the words, then another message appeared. "The kids hope you're having a good time." I smiled. I typed a simple response, "Merry Christmas. I love you all too. Enjoy your day, nothing more, no explanation, no guilt, no promises." I set the phone down, then I returned to my book. Something about that moment felt important. A year earlier, I had been sitting at my kitchen table while Brielle casually assigned me 15 guests. I had been expected to cook, clean, prepare, host, smile, and thank them for allowing me to do it. Now I was sitting beside a lake, alone by choice, and nobody was angry enough to ruin my peace. That was when I finally understood what had changed. It wasn't them, it was me. I had stopped asking whether they approved of my choices. I had stopped measuring my worth by how useful I was. I had stopped believing that saying no required a 10-minute explanation. And most importantly, I had stopped feeling guilty for enjoying my own life. When I returned home after New Year's, the house looked exactly as I had left it. I unpacked slowly. The wooden angel Marcus made as a child sat on my bookshelf. I touched its crooked wing and smiled. There were memories worth keeping. But memories didn't require me to sacrifice my future. A few days later, Marcus and the children visited. There was no crowd, no catering, no holiday agenda. Just 4 people sitting around a table. The children told me about school. Marcus asked about my trip. Brielle was quieter than usual. Eventually, she looked at me. "I owe you an apology." I waited. She took a breath. "I treated your help like it was guaranteed." I nodded. "I should have asked." "Yes." She looked down. "I was wrong." The words were simple. They weren't dramatic, but they mattered. I didn't need her to suffer. I didn't need her to admit I had been right about everything. I only needed her to understand that my kindness had never been an obligation. "I appreciate you saying that," I told her. The children interrupted us by asking for dessert. We all laughed. For the first time, I realized that boundaries hadn't destroyed my family. They had changed the way my family interacted with me. That was different. After they left, I stood in the doorway watching their car disappear down the street. I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel used. I felt peaceful. The following spring, I planted herbs in small pots beside my kitchen window. Basil, mint, rosemary. Every morning, I watered them while drinking coffee. It was such a small routine, but it belonged completely to me. My life became filled with small things I had once postponed. A hiking trip, a new book, a painting class, a weekend by the lake, dinner with friends, quiet mornings. Long walks. I learned that freedom didn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrived as a locked suitcase sitting beside your front door. Sometimes it looked like a cabin reservation. Sometimes it was 3 words typed into a phone, "No, but thanks." And sometimes it was simply sitting at a table meant for 15 people and realizing you were perfectly happy with 1 plate. I never stopped loving my family. I never wanted revenge. I never wanted Marcus or Brielle to feel abandoned. I simply wanted them to understand that I was a person before I was a mother, a woman before I was a grandmother, and a human being before I was the person everyone called when they needed something. Years of quiet sacrifice had taught them to expect my yes. One simple no taught all of us something different. Now, when Christmas approaches, I don't wait for someone else to decide where I'll be. I choose. Sometimes I go to the cabin. Sometimes I invite the children. Sometimes I spend the day with friends. And sometimes I sit alone beside my window with coffee and a good book. Every choice feels like mine. That's the part I value most. I used to think family meant always being available. Now I know family means respecting each other's lives. I used to believe love required sacrifice. Now I understand that healthy love also requires boundaries, and I used to think saying no would make people stop loving me. Instead, it showed me who could love me without needing something from me. The house is quieter now, but it is warmer, the table is smaller, but every seat is chosen. The guest room is no longer waiting for someone else's convenience. It is my reading room. The garage is nearly empty. The Christmas decorations fit into one small box. And on top of that box sits the wooden angel Marcus made in 2nd grade. I kept that one, not because I owe him anything, because some memories deserve to stay. I still remember the night Brielle said, "It's only 15 people." She probably thought she was asking for another Christmas. What she actually gave me was something much more valuable, a reason to finally stop living according to everyone else's expectations. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I didn't demand repayment for every favor. I simply left. And in leaving, I discovered something I had forgotten. My life was still waiting for me. There were roads I hadn't traveled, books I hadn't read, people I hadn't met, mornings I hadn't enjoyed, places I hadn't seen. There was still so much living left to do. So when someone asks me now what happened that Christmas, I don't tell them about the locked gate. I don't tell them about the angry messages. I don't tell them about the turkey that wasn't cooked properly. I tell them this: I finally realized that I didn't have to earn my place in my own life. I already belonged there, and once I understood that, I never gave that place away again.